Darcy sat alone in her darkened bedroom, the phone receiver pressed to her ear. Her index finger circled the coiled phone cord, allowing it to spiral around. Until the past few days, she hadn't picked up the old landline phone in years. She had forgotten its simple charms. The rain had lessened a bit. The sound of it was more calming now than it had been for most of the day. This had always been her favorite sound. Even after all that had happened, she found that she couldn't hold a grudge. It wasn't the rain's fault. The only light in the room came from one of the candles by her bed. Darcy was entranced by the movements of the flame, which caused shadows around the candle to dance, as if to a song only they could hear. She wanted to hear it too. She watched, and she waited. Beside the candle was her cell phone, which seemed to vibrate every few minutes, each time signaling a missed call or text message. She no longer cared to check her notifications. It was just more of the same, and she didn't want to hear any more well-wishers telling her she was going to be okay. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there like that, cross-legged in the middle of her bed with the old phone in her hand. It seemed like forever. The ringback tone repeated again and again. How long would she wait for him to pick up? Would he pick up at all? They had spoken briefly 3 days ago, but she hadn't been able to get much out of him. Why wouldn't he talk to her? In her other hand, Darcy held a small wooden picture frame, face down against her leg. With all the energy she could muster, she turned it over and looked down at the photograph. She remembered the day well. Campus had been unusually quiet, and the early spring weather had been pleasant. She was wearing one of Mark's hoodies, the gray one with the hole in the pocket. He had driven up that afternoon and surprised her after class. They had asked Jeanette to take the picture of them on the front steps of Barter Hall and spent the next 2 hours strolling the grounds. After that, they had gone to Frizzelli's for dinner, where they shared a plate of chicken Alfredo. He brought her back to her dorm parking lot and gave her the longest goodnight kiss before pulling himself away to drive home. It had been one of many perfect days. At least she thought it had been perfect. She didn't understand what happened. She needed him to explain. She needed him to pick up the phone. That was when the ringback tone stopped with a click, followed by silence. Darcy hesitated but spoke first.
"Mark?"
she said softly.
"Are you there?"
She heard a long, drawn-out breath.
"I'm here,"
said Mark's voice from the other end.
"I wasn't sure if you'd answer this time."
With another long breath, he answered.
"Neither was I."
Realizing that her legs had gone to sleep, Darcy unfolded them and lay back onto her pillow. She rolled onto her side, facing away from the candle, and made herself comfortable. She hoped for a long conversation this time, although she wasn't sure how to start.
"Where are you?"
she asked, resorting to small talk.
"Around."
His voice was cold. He was irritated. No one spoke for the next half-minute. Darcy's eyes wandered over every shape on that side of the room. Even in the dark, she could make out the features of the antique vanity that had been there most of her life. The lid to her laundry hamper was up, and a t-shirt was draped over the side. The familiar plush face of Larry the Lamb smiled up at her from the corner nearest to her closet door.
"Darcy,"
said Mark.
"you have to stop doing this."
Darcy closed her eyes as she felt them welling with tears. Her voice was a broken whisper.
"Do you know how much this hurts?"
"Baby, why do you think I wasn't answering?"
He was beginning to sound more like himself.
"Talking to me is just making it worse. I don't want to cause you more pain than I already have."
Darcy did not allow herself to begin sobbing, although it's all she wanted to do. Silent tears poured onto her pillow as she fought to keep it together. Taking a deep breath to center herself, she said with resolve,
"I need you to help me with this. I need you to help me understand what happened."
"Darcy."
he implored.
"I won't stop calling until you do."
"Darcy, I can't help you through this. I can't help you get over me."
"Yes, you can."
She glanced again at the picture.
And I'm not ready to get over you. It's only been a week.
Mark sighed.
I don't know what I can do to make this any easier.
Darcy rolled onto her back and stared at the ceiling.
I just need to know what happened. I need to know why. I need to know why I'm back home. Lying in my bedroom, being waited on by my parents and my sisters. I need to know why I'm in pain. I need to know why my entire life has been turned upside down.
She lifted her head and looked toward the bedroom door, which Meredith had closed after bringing her the phone. A shadow moved in the space below the door. They were out there listening. Darcy supposed she couldn't blame them for worrying, and she didn't really care what anyone else thought at this point. She rested her head back onto the pillow.
Most of all,
she said,
I need to know why I don't have you anymore. What is it that took you away from me?
There's just not a clear, easy answer to that,
said Mark. Now it was Darcy who was getting irritated.
Well, I'm going to need you to try.
There was another long pause. The rain had nearly stopped, and the room became deathly quiet.
Was it me?
She asked softly.
No.
Did I do something to make you...
No. Listen to me. Darcy, you were the best thing that ever came into my life. The most beautiful, most perfect person I've ever known. You were everything to me.
The sincerity in his voice was more than Darcy could bear, and she could no longer hold back the storm. She wept uncontrollably.
It was me,
he said.
It was all me. I screwed up.
But why?
She could barely speak.
Did you ever stop to think that maybe one of my reasons for not wanting to talk about this is that I'm afraid of how you'll see me?
She stared into Mark's face within the picture frame until she was able to catch her breath.
They said you'd been drinking all night. They said you were upset over something, but no one could get you to tell them what it was.
It wasn't you, Darcy.
He hesitated and then said,
I struggled with depression. I'd been on medication for years. I'm sorry I never told you.
Darcy didn't even know how to respond.
But I was tired of it. I wanted to be better. I didn't want to be dependent on a pill.
You stopped taking them?
I tried to fight through the withdrawals. I tried so hard. That night it got the better of me. All I could think was that I'd never be good enough for you. That I'd never amount to anything.
Mark.
I should have known better. I should have. But the rain was...
Darcy pulled herself back into a seated position. Her fingers gently brushed over Mark's face in the picture.
I told the others I was fine,
he said.
Told them I'd wait to sober up.
They should have stayed with you.
Please don't blame them. Blame me. It was a stupid, stupid thing. The rain, the drinking.
Darcy closed her eyes tightly, her whole body trembling.
I love you, Darcy,
he said.
Why didn't you wait?
She asked through clenched teeth.
Why didn't you just wait?
Slamming her fist onto the mattress, she cried.
Why did you get into that car?
He had no answer, and so they cried together.
I'm so sorry I hurt you,
said Mark. Her head and heart were pounding. She wanted him there with her. She wanted his arms around her.
I never wanted to leave you,
he said.
Never.
Those words gave Darcy solace while also tearing out her heart. Mark wanted to be with her, to make it work, but everything they were and everything they would have become was taken away because of a single mistake.
I'm so sorry,
he repeated. Darcy had managed to stop crying again. She let go of the receiver, holding it between her head and shoulder so she could stretch out her arm. She flicked at the spiral cord and watched it bounce. It almost induced a smile, but she forced that away.
If this hadn't happened,
she said,
do you think you would have married me?
I thought about it every day,
he said. Darcy could hear the smile in his voice.
I know I would have.
She groaned and said,
I hate this. I hate that I don't get to see you anymore.
You will. It's just gonna be a while, okay?
Yeah.
But listen, I want you to promise me that you'll keep going. Please just live your life, Darcy. Live, love, have children. Promise you'll do whatever it takes.
Darcy wasn't sure if she could make that promise.
I need to hear it.
He said.
I need to.
I promise,
She said. She wasn't sure if she meant it.
That's my girl.
She couldn't help herself. That always made her smile.
Oh, I meant to ask you.
He said.
Why have you been using that phone?
She reached for the phone cable, which hung freely over the side of the bed, and pulled it to her until the connector at the end was in her hand. She was aware of the absurdity of the situation.
everyone's been blowing up my cell.
She said anyway.
I didn't want us to be interrupted.
Makes perfect sense.
They laughed.
I miss you,
Said Darcy.
and I'm going to love you for the rest of my life.
I know.
He replied.
I love you too.
I know.
Neither wanted to hang up the phone. Darcy brushed a tear from her cheek before it could fall.
Get some rest.
Said Mark. She smiled, releasing too many tears to catch.
You too.
She whispered.
Good night.
Good night.
She slowly put down the receiver, not even bothering to put it back onto its base. A few seconds later, there was a small knock at the door, followed by the creaking of hinges as it opened. Meredith peeked her head inside and smiled warmly at her sister. Darcy gathered the phone and its cords into her hands and held them out to Meredith. The 16-year-old stepped close enough to the bed to take them from her.
Thank you.
Said Darcy. Meredith continued to smile, but the concern in her eyes was obvious. Darcy thought it was funny that the younger of her two sisters, the one who had never really had a serious boyfriend, was the one showing the most empathy. To even comply with such a ridiculous request as this meant the world to Darcy.
I'll be okay.
Said Darcy. Meredith nodded.
Just know that we're all here for you.
Darcy smiled as Meredith walked to the door. Before leaving, she looked back and said,
You know that we all loved Mark, right?
I know.
Meredith left the room, quietly closing the door behind her. Darcy tried to make herself comfortable. She rested her head onto her pillow, facing the candle. The picture frame lay on the bed near to her, where she could still see Mark's face. As she watched the dancing flame, her cell phone caught her eye, and she picked it up at last. She had 12 missed calls, 17 text messages, and 43 social media posts from loved ones. Outside the door, Meredith walked to the hallway closet. Her 26-year-old sister Candace stood nearby at the top of the stairs.
You really shouldn't encourage behavior like that,
She said.
Have some faith in her.
Said Meredith, opening the closet door.
She knows what's what. She's not going to lose herself.
Candace nodded toward the phone in Meredith's hands.
That could make things worse.
Meredith gave her a sharp look.
Seemed to me it made her feel better.
She knelt down in front of the closet. Looking into the darkness there, she said,
Didn't you love Mark too? Wouldn't you want a chance to say goodbye if you could?
Yes,
said Candace.
but we can't.
She walked downstairs and turned toward the living room, probably going to tell Mom and Dad all about it. Meredith shook her head and sighed, holding that old phone. Mark had been a brother to her for the last 6 years, and she had secretly cried herself to sleep every night for the past week. She wanted the chance to say goodbye. As she held the receiver up to her ear, it seemed a bit silly. And yet, somehow she knew it wasn't silly at all.
Goodbye, Mark.
She said. She leaned into the dark closet, toward a box of random, unused items. Before she could place the phone inside, she heard Mark's voice from the other end.
Goodbye.
It said.